great to have you with us, and we hope this is going to be a time that makes a real difference in your life, a very positive moment for you and all of yours. As we come together, we're glad that you're listening in, and we hope that this will be a time of music and message that will bring joy and hope to you and yours and give you a sense of uplifting in your life. May your soul experience a connection with God, and through that connection help you to be the positive person that you can be and can make a difference for God in the world. We're glad that you're here, and we hope that this service will bring a joy to your life, and I know that you're bringing a joy to ours. I ask us now to start with a word of prayer. God, as we come before you, we do so thanking you for giving us this opportunity, for allowing us to be together through your Spirit connecting with ours. Bless us, guide us, but most importantly, inspire us to be your people, to share your message, to share you with others, as we pray this in your name. Amen. Our first song that we have for this evening is one that's a very familiar one, I'm sure, to most of us. We've all heard it one way or another. It's entitled, "We Are the Church." I am the church, you are the church, we are the church together. Oh, follow Jesus all around the world. Yes, we're the church together. The church is not a building, the church is not a steeple, the church is not a resting place, the church is a people. I am the church, you are the church, we are the church together. All who follow Jesus all around the world. Yes, we're the church together. We're many kinds of people with many kinds of faces, all colors and all ages, from all times and places. I am the church, you are the church, we are the church together. All who follow Jesus all around the world. Yes, we're the church together. Sometimes a church is marching, sometimes it's bravely burning, sometimes it's riding, sometimes hiding, always learning. I am the church, you are the church, we are the church together. All who follow Jesus all around the world. Yes, we're the church together. And when the people gather, there's singing and there's praying, there's laughing and there's crying, sometimes all of it saying, I am the church, you are the church, we are the church together. All who follow Jesus all around the world. Yes, we're the church together. And as I said at the beginning in that first verse, we are praying, and I invite us now to be in a word of prayer. God, thank you for giving us this time together, being our hope, our help, of being the one that brings us new life, that brings us eternal love, but most importantly, that brings us together. May you and we become your people that make a difference, a positive difference in the lives of those who are seeking help and hope. In a world that struggles, in a world that particularly at this time of year is in a spirit of angst, wondering what's going to happen, we know that you are in control. Guide us, direct us, but most importantly, go with us, allowing your Spirit to be our partner together in the world that needs to hear about you. As we pray this in your name. Amen. Our second song that we have for this evening is a song entitled, Lead On, O King Eternal. No, wait a minute. No, they're just two. My bad. We didn't. At this time, we're going to share together in our message. And our message for this evening is continuing in the discussion that I've had in regards to the disciples and what they mean to us in our lives, how each of those disciples bring importance into our lives in a way that through the special gifts that each of them had, how they make a difference, how they help us to be a people of faith in our world today. Because what they experienced in their day is exactly what we experience. We and they were no different. And so the message that they have for us is one that can help us in our lives to be able to be the people of faith to a world that needs the faith of Christ. I am the church. You are the church. We are the church together. All who follow Jesus all around the world. Yes, we're the church together. We've sung those words many times, especially when we would be in our elementary years in Sunday school, for those that participated in Sunday school. But I want them to bring into our mind once again, as we continue our discussion of the disciples of Jesus and how they remind us of how we can be like them in our world today. As we're seeing a world that's going through, particularly in our country, going through a change of leadership and that struggle we have that every 4 years, it's important for us to think about how change happens, and when it does, what that means for us, what it can mean for me, what it can mean for you, what it can mean for the world in which you live and move and have your being, as the saying goes. For our discussion now, I'm asking us to consider a disciple whose life reflects the tenderness, the caring side of humanity. All of us live in a world that at times we know does not treat us well. Particularly many experience in their workplace the drive, the push, the pushing us beyond our limits. And if we fail, they're so quick to get rid of us. The challenge of living in a world that many times can be so unfair. But Jesus lived in that world. His disciples lived in the same world. Nothing has changed over the centuries. And as you and I go through this time together in our world, going through the angst of what's going to happen, going through the many challenges and changes that are occurring within our daily living as it ebbs and flows and quickly is moving faster and faster, we're not alone. Those before us experienced it as well. But we can learn from them. And that's why I'm sharing about the disciples. And the message for this week is on the disciple Thaddeus. Thaddeus was an interesting name, of course. And it's a derivative of the late Hebrew word thad, which means breast. And the word was to describe the caring side of living. He was the disciple who, if he went by his name, would care for people and what was happening in their lives, which all of us are asked to do. I'm asking us in the time we have together to consider this disciple of Jesus who reminds us, points to us the understanding that every one of us is here to share the loving, nurturing side of Christ to the world. To show how Jesus cares for us through his giving of self to you and to me. And to have, so that we would have life, not only while we're here, but following our passing from this world. In other words, Thaddeus' life, Thaddeus' ministry, calls us to take Jesus' life, share it with persons, letting them know that Jesus is the true friend, that Jesus is the caring spiritual partner from whom we can learn how to reach and to teach others of this same love, this same hope, this same caring and sharing that we experience once we connect with Christ, and bring them into that loving fold of faith. Jesus is the nurturing spirit of life for you and me. I was thinking of the words of our opening song, in the life of Thaddeus, and I was reminded of my grandparents. It's through the nurturing of those who are our family, who raise us and show us, help us to learn the tools that we need in order to survive in this imperfect globe in which we live. If we think about it, we know that we have learned and borrowed from our ancestors and are using that for ourselves as well as for our children. And if we're honest, I think all of us knows there are times when this nurturing can be good and it can help us, as well as there are times when this nurturing can be detrimental and remind us that none of us is perfect. But whichever moment we discern this, there's no denying that the nurturing we receive as we grow lasts for a lifetime. They become the foundational blocks by which we function in our world. An example of this occurred to me as I thought about those years that I spent growing up on a dairy farm in northeast Iowa. Many of you who have grown up on farms will be able to relate to what I'm about to share. My father was a dairy farmer with a herd which at the time was a very large herd. He had about 70 milking cows. It doesn't take too much also to know that a herd of cattle that size, as well as all the calves that they produce over a period of years, can also produce a tremendous amount, let's see, what word do I use to describe it? Tremendous amount of fertilizing opportunity for the farm so that crop can grow. And part of my growing was the process of transporting that cattle fertilizer to the fields to help the crop yields. When this process day was happening on the farm, my father had worked out a very efficient system for this process. He'd load the fertilizer into the spreading unit and haul it out to the field. My job when my dad would return for another load was his coming in fourth gear wide open on his tractor. He was booking, and you better be looking, because he's coming and that gate had better be open for him to just come flying in. Don't waste Dad's time. That's because my father grew up in a work ethic that was very intense. And the common understanding was that what we had to do had to be done now. It had to be done now. It's got to be done now. Because we don't have time tomorrow. It's got to happen now. Because if you didn't get it done today, you were in trouble because it should have been done yesterday. And as my father would be within a couple of football fields of the cattle yard, he'd let out a whistle. It could be heard through walls. I don't know how he did it. I don't have that capacity. I never learned how to do it. But he could do it, and it would pierce the house, telling us, be out there with that gate open into the cattle yard so that he did not have to slow down. He could load up once more. What happened if I didn't get the gate open? There'd be an awfully quick teaching moment of which you don't want to have happen a second time. Now, I share this because I still respond to that whistle to this day. My wife knows how to do that whistle. When she lets that whistle out, I come running. It's immediate. My whole body goes into, now, attention, whenever I hear it. She thinks it's funny to do it to me once in a while, just to see what happens. There's a bird, the bobolink, which has that same whistle. If I'm someplace where there's a bobolink close and it does that whistle, I will react. It's ingrained. It's a part of me. It was a part of who I was, and I come to an alert status. I'm not saying whether that's good or bad. It's just what is. It's what I grew up with. And I share this as a lesson to us that those early moments, those early learnings that we have go with us. They never leave us. They're in our minds, pointing up how important it is for us to be those disciples of faith in teaching and reaching from the get-go. Get that message out when we're little so that it goes with us. Getting into the lives of boys and girls and men and women, knowing that they will store it in their subconscious, and as they age, they will never forget. We like to think that sometimes we'll start when we're older. Too late to have it be part of who you are. It begins when you're little. For a few moments, allow me to share how this nurturing, this vital caring, as seen in the life of Thaddeus, can be alive in our congregations and communities today, in each and every one of us. One of the important lessons of Thaddeus' life as an apostle teaches us is that when we share God, show God, when we talk of God to persons, we should never fear that we failed. We can take courage in that and confidently share God's love both in word and in deed, knowing that it's going to make a lasting difference in lives. Whether we see it or don't see the results, it's there. We trust God to keep that in their lives. I remember one moment, proves the point I just made, but which was a negative experience that's still a part of our family to this day. I realized it many years ago as my paternal grandfather was beginning to lose his control of feelings, and how that challenge created a lifetime of hurt and pain, a lesson I've never forgotten. He had a way of what we would culturally describe as saying what he thinks. There was no filter for my German grandfather. And as I look back on it now, I'm convinced that he was in that starting phase of what we now know as Alzheimer's, but then was understood as losing a sense of reality and living within one's own world. One of those moments created generational damage to the family when my uncle and his wife were visiting my grandfather along with their 2 adopted children because of my aunt's infertility. During the time together with my grandfather, he looked at the 2 grandchildren, and because he had lost his ability to curb his thoughts, to stop and just think about what he was about to say, he said to the 2 children he was glad to see him even though they weren't his real grandchildren. As you can imagine, my grandfather, who we now know wasn't aware of what he was saying because of Alzheimer's setting in, had in that moment driven a huge wedge into the relationship between family and grandfather. It was so huge, in fact, that they rarely would go see him in. After that moment, they refused to see him, and it was a moment, as I said, that is never healed. As I hear from my cousin, the daughter, who lives in Iowa City, and shares with me about it. Now, I know we think, that's terrible. Why would he say such a thing? And yet I have, over the years of ministry, seen the same thing happen in churches. I've seen moments, I've counseled with persons who've had the same thing happen. One such moment occurred years ago when the chairperson of what we call the committee that oversees the life of the pastor during the time that you're in the church, what we call our pastor-parish relations committee. In a church that I pastored at the time, a person who wholeheartedly claimed a relationship with Jesus sat across from my desk. And I remember him saying to me, "Pastor, there are just certain people who could not be a part of this church." And he meant it. He meant it. The proverbial gate into that church had been closed, and the whole community suffered. I am the church. You are the church. We are the church together. All of God's people all around the world. Yes, we're the church together. Are we? Thaddeus, the disciple whose life and ministry reminds us of the basics of spiritual nurture, is the reminder that we must never close our doors, real and in our minds, to persons of our communities within our world. Instead, we need to show it. most important proof of nurturing that the disciples received in their time with Jesus was that from the very moment Jesus gathered them all together, they were taught to be a people who were to teach and to reach into all corners of the known world. And remember, this was in a time when 10 miles from home was a long distance. And they were to go to the end of the world, sharing the faith that they'd been taught by Jesus, by God. They were prepared to show it to others. This is one of the difficult challenges that has been leveled against mainline denominations in recent years, United Methodism included. In our denomination of United Methodism, I'm reading, I'm hearing week after week of the decline that's happening. At our last annual conference, our annual meeting that we have to make decisions regarding the ministry for our territory over which we're responsible. As happens each year's gathering, there's a recognition of the pastors who are retiring, as well as all those who've reached that 40-year pinnacle. And this past year, I was mentioned as one of those pastors. I didn't personally hear it because of the COVID-19 scare and not attending, but received a note from the pastor of my home church who said, "You were mentioned at annual conference." This was on the Zoom computer broadcast. Mentioned for 40 years of ministry. To be honest with you, I really had to go to the basement and look once again at my ordination papers to realize it really had been 40 years. I thanked her for making me feel so old. But she was right. And in that group of retirees, there were about 40 pastors completing their full-time ministries. But when it came time for the ordination of the new pastors, who were going to be starting out, there was a class of under 5. Under 5. What's happening? We have to be honest, in most of our congregations, lost our focus. We've lost sight of our purpose. We've become more concerned with the social, political issues rather than the encouraging, evangelizing, engaging of persons to know Christ. We've flipped the priority. At least that's my opinion. And if our leadership has lost sight of that calling to go out into the world and to share Christ, how can we expect the people of a congregation to do so? That was Thaddeus' message, that we need to meet men and women, boys and girls, and help them know God. I am the church. You are the church. We are the church together, all of God's people all around the world. Yes, we're the church together. The final way of Thaddeus' life demonstrates the importance of knowing and meeting Jesus in our world today as we grow it. My paternal grandmother, before she passed away, had made it clear she always wanted someone within the family to go into ministry. When she discovered and or heard me say when I was 3 or 4 years old that I wanted to be a minister, she was, as I've always been told, thrilled. From that moment on, it was her calling to encourage her young grandson. She became a modern-day Thaddeus, and she encouraged me in many ways. She'd give me books about Jesus. She would always give me study guides from her United Methodist Women's Studies. She would buy me books about faith and God, and most importantly, she'd be there in church, and I could sit with Grandma during worship. The year was 1978. And I, having recently been appointed to my first parish, I got a call from my parents telling me that my grandmother was dying from cancer. Could I give her a call? Because she wasn't going to be long for the world. I called, and I'll never forget her final words as she shared it with me. Her last words were, now that I'd been ordained to my first parish, her final words were, everything's all right now. Everything's all right. Folks, that's a Thaddeus moment. as she took the time to still nurture and encourage. Yes, Thaddeus reminds us of the importance, the calling to help encourage persons to grow in their faith. Just as through this ministry here, we're encouraging each of you to grow. When we had that coronavirus which forced closing of our churches, it was a challenge for us to discern how can we continue to be a people of faith to our communities and beyond. This ministry grew out of that so that we could be with you. And then there were a couple of Thaddeus disciples who came up with a way for us to enter that world of ministry. Very common on TV, internet. Very common for those big churches. Yeah, we all know. But us? And we found out what the answer was. Yes. As some Thaddeus disciples came forward and said, we can do this. Here we are, together. It's been said the church is just one generation away from extinction. And that's so true when we forget or ignore God's spiritual nudging. We've seen in the past few months that a small, invisible germ can make or break business, lives, the church, as well as any other organization. We've also seen that God's Spirit works best when challenged. As God plants seeds of potential opportunities in the minds and the hearts of persons, you and I are still here. And we can still find ways to make faith desirable, exciting, uplifting, enticing. How? By following the example of Thaddeus. And get involved in koinonia, being the church. Wherever we are, wherever we can be inviting, engaging, encouraging persons to visit us as God visits them. As Thaddeus' example teaches, I am the church. You are the church. We are the church together. All of God's children, all around the world. Yes, we're the church together. We're glad you're here. We hope that in some way we've been able to implant within your minds the time to ask God to bring help and hope to you. To help you know that you and God have a powerful ministry for our world. Thanks for listening. Our final song we want to share with you for this evening is a song entitled He Leadeth Me. He leadeth me, oh blessed thought, oh words with heavenly comfort fraught. Whate'er I do, where'er I be, still 'tis God's hand that leadeth me. He leadeth me, He leadeth me, by His own hand He leadeth me. His faithful follower I would be, for by His hand He leadeth me. And when my task on earth is done, when by Thy grace the victory's won, in death's cold wave I will not fear, for God through Jordan leadeth me. He leadeth me, He leadeth me, by His own hand He God, lead us, guide us. God, bring help and hope. But more importantly, God, connect with us. Connect with any and all who hear, any and all who are seeking, so that in that partnership of hope and help, in that partnership of you and them, our world will be a place of your spirit, your purpose, your will being done. As we ask all this in your name. Amen. Thank you.